Before I get started, I have a few quick announcements to go through here. The first is that Maxqda has just come out with the Maxqda Press, which is where you can go and download literature and guides about Maxqda. And these are instructional PDFs and booklets that you can get. I highly recommend, and that's at maxqda-press.com. The second announcement here is that the Maxqda Textbook is now available as a free PDF until the end of July. So this is a textbook that came out back in November of 2019, so it's fairly recent, and it's by Udo Kukarts, who is actually the brain behind Maxqda, and then Stefan Radiker, who's been working with Maxqda for quite a long time. So I really recommend as well that you go and pick up this textbook because the regular sale price is around $50 or $60. So this is a really great deal. Again, it's a free PDF, and that's at maxqda.com/live-training. And yeah, that's all the announcements I had today. So a little bit about me before we begin. I have been using Maxqda now for 3 years. I first learned about Maxqda while I was working on my master's degree at the University of Chicago. And since then I've used Maxqda for a variety of different projects, mostly in the international development space. And you can feel free to reach out to me after this session if you have any additional questions that you need help with. If you want to set up a one-on-one training session or a session for your group, or if you are interested in co-analysis, I do that as well. So my email is danielle@jacquescs.com. You can also find me on Twitter or at my websites listed there. I'm going to go ahead and dive right into using Maxqda for literature reviews. But one thing I want to mention up front is one, this is considered an advanced webinar, so I'm going to be walking you through a lot of these tools, especially the more advanced tools that I know aren't as common or are maybe a little bit more complicated. But for basic things such as how to create and add codes, I'm not going to be going into that too much unless someone has a specific question about it. If you're brand new to Maxqda, you can certainly still sit in on this session. In fact, I encourage you to, but just know if you want more in-depth instruction on like the basics of Maxqda, you can attend one of the beginner webinars. I believe there's one on Monday around this time that you can go to. The other thing that I wanted to mention before I address one of the questions in the chat is I don't want to spend too much time today talking about methodology here because of course, we just talked about the different topics that you guys are all looking at, and for me to go into any one specific methodology would probably not fit a lot of the projects. And also, I'm not an expert on literature review methodology, but what I do know really well is Maxqda. So what I want to do today is, whether you're doing a traditional literature review, a narrative literature review, whatever type of literature review it may be, I want to focus less on the methodology behind that and how you do it, but rather just give you an overview of the tools in Maxqda that you can use to achieve your literature review, whatever method you've chosen for it. I hope that makes sense. And another question is, are the literature reviews only available in 2020, or does 2018 have it as well? Yes, you can do this in 2018 and in the 2020 version. I'm running the 2020 version, and there are a few differences, but for the most part, everything will be the same, and I'll try to point out when I'm using a new function. Okay, so all of that said, I also want to just point out a few resources that you can use for literature review with Maxqda. In particular, I would recommend looking at Christina Silver's work. She's also a Maxqda trainer like me, and she has some really great free PDFs out there for literature reviews. That first one there is using qualitative software in general, and then she also has one specifically for Maxqda. So just Google those, Google her name, you'll find that. And then the last resource I would say is the free PDF on the Maxqda website. It's like a 20-page little brochure that you can download for free, and that has more info on literature reviews. All right, so I'm going to open up Maxqda now. Oh, and quick note as well, if you have questions during this webinar, please feel free to put them in the chat. But I'm going to generally answer all the questions at the very end of my demo, which will be about 40 minutes or so. All right, so this is, of course, Maxqda, the main interface of it. And I'm going to start a new project and just work you through the process from scratch of how you import bibliographic data into Maxqda. And then I'll actually open up a literature review that I've been working on currently, and we'll see what it looks like after you've done that import. So, of course, I'm going to hit New Project. And I'm just going to give it today's date as the name and hit Save. Okay, so of course this is a completely blank Maxqda project right now, so I need always the first step in doing the literature review here is to import my bibliographic data. So that includes, all that good stuff like author, date, title, what type of reference it is, etc. And also in Maxqda, it allows you to import the text or the material itself. So if you've downloaded that PDF or, you have access to that article, or if it's a web page, that will come in as well. The best way to do this is to work with a reference manager software. And there's a couple options. So if you come to your import tab up here, there's this option right here called reference manager data. And if you open this, it will tell you the available options. So you can import from EndNote, Mendeley, or Zotero. If you're using another type of software not listed here, you can still import it as long as you have the data formatted in RIS file type, and we'll talk about that in a second. And also, it was just announced that there's a new update to Maxqda 2020 that's coming out very shortly, where you'll be able to import from Citavi as well. So don't fear if you don't see your program located here, it's still possible. Today, for the purpose of this demonstration, I'm going to show you how to do it with Zotero. So I'm just going to open up Zotero quickly to show you what I've done here. Okay, so I am currently doing some research on a drug called rivaroxaban, which also goes by the brand name Xarelto. And I'm also looking into the disease that it treats, which is venous thromboembolism. I am not at all from a science background. I have no medical training whatsoever. In fact, I'm a sociologist by training. So you can imagine I was quite lost when I had to start looking into this topic. And so what I did was I collected a lot of different literature and websites talking about this drug and the disease, and I collected them here in Zotero. So this is the first step, of course, just amassing your literature on the topic that you've chosen. So there is a little bit of upfront work here in terms of working with the bibliographic data in your software. So for example, you'll see some of my resources in here. The info on it is more complete than in others. So this one here, this is just a web page that I got from the Mayo Clinic. And Zotero, of course, couldn't really identify the author's name, so that's blank. there's no abstract because it's just a web page and so on. But if you're working strictly with academic work, like articles and so on, you should have this quite robustly filled out. And if you don't, it might be worth just a few minutes to fill it out manually by hand, and you'll see why once we do the import. But again, just amassing this literature in your reference manager and making sure the bibliographic data is in there and is complete and accurate is the first step here. Once you've done this, you want to export this folder or this library as a .ris file type. Zotero has this option, of course. All the other major reference managers should have that .ris file type. Here on Zotero, it is, if I right-click on my folder, there's the option to export the collection. And if I do that, it will ask me, what format do you want it in? Again, you want RIS. And it will also ask if you want to export the notes and the files. Notes in Zotero will go into Maxqda as memos. We'll see in a second. And export the files as well. So if you have PDFs attached to your references, it will also include those as part of the package. Lastly, you want to make sure that you're in Unicode encoding. Maxqda is fully Unicode compliant, so whatever language you're working in, it should be fine as long as you put it in Unicode. Then you just hit OK, and of course you want to save your RIS file to your computer. I've already done that, so I'm not going to save it. I'm going to cancel, but of course make sure you hit OK on your own version. Okay, so that's pretty much all you need to do in your reference manager. So I'm going to close out Zotero and return to Maxqda here. Now we want to import that RIS file that we created. So again, we want to come back to our Import tab, go to Reference Manager Data, and then you choose the program that you're working with. Again, if you're not working with one of these three, you would choose this last option here, and it's going to be the same basic process. So import from Zotero is going to ask you to select the file. So this is that RIS file, again, that we made. Okay, so once you locate it in your computer, just double check over here in the type column that you're selecting the RIS. So that's Research Information Systems document. If I just select this folder, nothing's going to happen, of course. Just hit open. And now you have a couple of import options here. And again, this is the same if you're working with EndNote or Mendeley or what have you. The first is to import the references. So that's the bibliographic data itself. The second here is import the attachments, and that would be the articles that you have attached to it, and so on. Next, you have only PDF files. You can say yes or no, up to you and what type of data you have in your reference manager. Autocode keywords. So if you're working with academic data that has keywords attached to it, these will come in and will be auto-coded in your code system. And we'll see what that looks like in just a second. Add notes as document memos. If you've taken notes on your bibliographic data in the reference manager, that will be imported and attached to that document here in Maxqda as a memo. And then this last option here is important if you have large attachments. So if you have a reference in your manager that is a really large file, either by size, just by size, it might be a good idea to check off this box here, which will store that reference, or I'm sorry, that attachment externally to Maxqda. So that way your Maxqda file will stay very, very light, and you won't have any issues loading it up or like having crashes if your computer is not very high end, for example. Once you have all of these checked off the way you want, you go ahead and click OK, and it will start the import. I'm not going to hit OK right here because when I tested this yesterday, it took quite a while to import it. And I'm afraid, especially now being on GoToMeeting, that it would take even longer to do the import live in front of you. So what I'm going to do at this point is actually open up the imported, the project with the imported data. You just have to trust that if you hit OK on this screen on your own Maxqda license, it will do the import and it will work fabulously, I promise. So. Okay, so this is what it looks like when you hit OK and you do that import. A couple of things have happened here. First, we'll take a look at the document system. The import will automatically create two document groups here. The first called references, and the second references attachments. So looking at this references group here, it creates one Maxqda document per reference that you had in your reference manager. And if you're wondering why there are question marks here, this is what I was talking about when I mentioned that it might be useful to make sure that your references are good and accurate and complete in your reference manager before you import it. Because you can see here, this is just one of the, this is just a PDF about the drug that I have. And there's no author that I filled out. So when Maxqda went to name this document, it looked for the author but couldn't find it, so it put in question mark. But if I scroll down, you can see I have these other documents that are named very nicely with the author and the date. So again, put in that upfront work and you'll thank yourself for it. You can also rename the documents as well. So I don't have to keep this question mark here. I can rename it to Zotero Clinical Studies or whatever I want it to be. So up to you how you work there. When I click on each document, you can see that it has essentially created this list of that bibliographic data, and each piece of bibliographic data is coded over here on the side. So you can see we have in this one the type of reference. It's a journal, or I think it's a journal. It has the title of it here, the authors, the publication dates, periodical name, volume number, and issue number. Then you have the start and end pages here, a link to the PDF, and this will link me to it here in Maxqda. I'll show you in just a second. The database that it's from, ISBN if there is one, and so on. And then this is also the URL that I got it from online. So all of that is in there. Of course, the less bibliographic data you have in your reference manager, the less you'll have when you import it. And at this point, it is important to note that there's no dynamic relationship between your reference manager and Maxqda. So for example, these question marks, if I went to this reference in Zotero and filled out the bibliographic data more completely, that wouldn't change anything here in Maxqda. So they're not talking to each other now. But so anytime you change something in Zotero, you'll have to re-export it and re-import it into Maxqda. And that's the same thing for, if you import 20 documents from Zotero or from EndNote, if you do another 20 on Zotero, to get those 20 into Maxqda, you'll have to initiate a second import. But the good news about all of this is that Maxqda will notice duplicates. So you don't have to worry about, creating a new folder in Zotero or in EndNote before you import. You can just use, the same project that you're working on, just export it again and import it. I hope that that is clear. Okay, so those are the references there. The second group that we have in our document system are the attachments. And these are the documents themselves. So if we look at it, this is a PDF of the article that I had in Zotero. You can also do websites. They look a little weird. I just captured this with the Zotero web extension on Firefox. So I have all this kind of nonsense until I scroll down. But you can get the whole website. But I think it looks the best, of course, if you're working with really nice journal articles like this. And these are linked to those references that we saw before. So if we come back to our references folder here, if I want to now read this article and start coding it and working with it, I can click on the link that's right here. And here it is. And you can see I've actually already started coding it. Another quick note just about working with PDFs here in Maxqda. I recommend only using PDFs that have that text recognition. So for example, on this, I can highlight the words. If you have like a scan of a book and it's just an image, really, if you import it into Maxqda, that's totally fine. You can still work with it, but it will be treated as a photograph and not as a piece of text like it is here. But again, it's not impossible, just something to note. So whenever you can, I really recommend having a nice PDF like this. Okay, so that's the document system here. And the other thing that happens when you import happens in your code system. And that's the fact that it creates this code called references here. And underneath the references, it actually creates two subcodes, one called RIS and the other called keywords. So if we look in our RIS category, you can see that we have all this bibliographic metadata here listed as codes. And that's what we saw in our references document. Let me just pull it back up. Okay, so here in our document of the reference, you can see all these tags here on the side. These are codes listed over here as well. Next, you have the keywords. So this is where I mentioned up front where if your article has keywords attached to it, they'll be auto-coded here. So you can see we have just a few keywords, and some of them can be combined because they're just French translations of the English. But this is something good to keep in note, and especially if you are working in a more academic discipline and looking to do this for your dissertation, for example, this would be really helpful because then you can sort of sift through your literature by keyword. So if I wanted to, I could only focus on the references I have here that are focused on orthopedic surgery, or I could look at just those that are tagged as safety or so on. So really nice function here. I do recommend always auto-coding your keywords. I just think it's helpful. Okay, so that's what it looks like when you import your literature here into Maxqda. And from this point, there are a lot of different things that you can do to start working with it. And again, I mentioned up front, this isn't, I don't want to go too much into methodology of specific types of literature reviews, but now I will start to cover some of the different tools. And I hope that I just give you some ideas for how you can work with your literature review for your project. The first suggestion that I have here actually is to create in your code system something called critical appraisal. And this is actually an idea that I'm sort of taking from Christina Silver, who I mentioned at the beginning. And according to Christina, there are 5 questions that you can ask to do a critical appraisal of your literature. And you can put those in as codes here, and this will make more sense in just a second. But the 5 questions here are, why am I reading this? What are the authors trying to achieve in writing this? So what's their goal? What are they claiming that's relevant to my work? So how does it relate to what I'm studying? How convincing are these claims and why? And in conclusion, what can I make from this? So these are 5 questions that you can think of when you read your literature. And here in Maxqda, you can actually create these as codes. And then after you've thought through these questions for each of your documents, you can go back and get a high-level overview of the author's claims across all of your documents, for example. Or you can get an overview of how convincing all the authors were. So what that looks like is just going to copy this. Let's find a good reference here. Okay, so for this journal article here, let's say I want to do my critical appraisal of it. I can actually edit this reference document here and put those questions in at the top and then start adding my answers. So I'm going to turn on edit mode. It's this little pencil icon up here in the top right, and that allows me to start adding text to this document and start to format it. So I'm going to just paste those questions in here. Give myself some space. And then, like I mentioned, I can just start answering these questions. So I don't want to go too much into these, but I'm reading this to understand how to prevent thromboembolic disease. And then I can move on to my second question. They are trying to show us how to, and so on. Hopefully when you're doing this, your answers are much better than what I've just written here. But for the sake of keeping this nice and short, I'm just going to put in these like silly answers here. But so once you have your answers to the questions, you can turn off your edit mode. And then you can actually code these responses. So this response here, it's a response, of course, to question 1, why am I reading this? So over here in my code system, you can see I already have my 5 questions listed as codes. I can just apply code number 1 to this response. Same thing with number 2. What are they trying to achieve? And for all 5, I'll code my answers there. Then I can work with my retrieved segments window to pull all of my responses for all of the literature. So if you're new to Maxqda, I'll go over this super quickly, but there's a 4th menu here in Maxqda called Retrieved Segments. And this will retrieve coded segments of text based on specific documents and on specific codes. So if I want to get a high-level overview of my reason for reading all of these articles, I can activate all of my documents and then activate the code that I'm looking at. So I'm going to activate all of my references here, and I'll look at what the authors are claiming. So I'll activate code for question number 2. And you can see here in the retrieved segments, it's just pulled my response there. So if I've done this for all of my literature, all of my like 20 articles here, I would have 20 responses showing me what the authors are claiming. You can also add other codes here. So these 5 that have the numbers, those are again from Christina Silver's work. But I like to have some other categories in there that I actually apply not to this reference sheet itself, but actually to the articles themselves or to the documents themselves. So resetting things here, if I open up this, we'll look at this journal article here. Okay, so for this article on whether prophylaxis is an option for acutely ill hospital patients, I can read through, and if there's any important quotes or unsubstantiated claims or perhaps gaps in the data, or just something that I feel like I personally need to research more or follow up on because I'm not quite sure I understand that topic or that theory, I can actually tag those with codes. So you'll see here under my critical appraisal category, I've added just those categories up here. So again, important quotes, unsubstantiated claims, gap in the data. So as I read through this, if I decide that this paragraph is really important and I might want to quote it in my dissertation or in my article, I can add that code to it. So then later, once I've coded all of my literature, I've reviewed all of it, I can again use my retrieved segments window to pull only those important quotes or only those unsubstantiated claims. And again, that's done by activation if you're new to Maxqda. So I'll just activate my document and the category or code I'm interested in. And you can see here now in the retrieved segments, it's pulling that paragraph that I just coded as an important quote. So of course, these are just some ideas here for codes that you can have to help think through your data, but it will depend on your situation and again, your methodology. But these are some of the ones that I like to work with myself here. The other thing is you can apply codes to the literature as if it were any other type of data. So for example, I usually work with interviews in Maxqda, and I like to take a grounded theory approach where I'm just adding lots of thematic codes and lots of descriptive codes to the data. Good news is you can do that same thing here with literature PDFs or literature documents. So you'll see also here in my code system, I've actually gone ahead and done some of that. So again, this was an attempt for me to understand this very scientific, very medical topic, and specifically to understand what this drug is, how it works, why you would take it, what the side effects are, and then also to understand the drug the disease that it's used to treat. So I went ahead and in my code system, I just added all of those things as codes. So as I'm reviewing these articles and these clinical trials, I can go through and just tag all of these things. Let's find one that I've coded. This bigger. Okay, so on this one, for example, this is just looking at the disease's efficacy for treating thromboembolisms or thromboembolic disease. And so I've gone through and I've tagged things like mortality and morbidity. The disease VTE is associated with mortality. Then later I have complications here. I also have treatments. I have warfarin, which is a competing drug to the one that I'm looking at. And then I have treatments tagged for that drug as well. So by going through all of my literature and tagging it or coding it like this, I can then, again with my retrieved segments, pull any of these topics that I'm interested in learning more about and see what that overview is. So let me activate all of my documents here. And let's say I want to see what all of these studies are saying about the symptoms, or rather the side effects of this drug. I can activate my side effects code here. And if I take back my retrieved segments, again, in this window here, I have a nice overview of all those segments that were coded with side effects. So now I can go through and see, okay, the side effects of this drug are bleeding risk. If you're about to have a surgery, you might not want to take it. If you stop taking it, you risk blood clots, etc. So this is a really nice way for me to just focus in on, just the side effects. And likewise, to put this in more of like a non-medical context, you could do this for like a specific theory. So you could go through your literature and see how people are putting specific theories into use, how they're using it, and then you can come back and look at that theory in an overview or whatever it may be. Of course, this is going to vary based on your topic. All right. So that's how you can use codes to review your literature. I wanted to talk about memos in Maxqda and how you can use them to sort of organize and record your thoughts for a literature review. As I mentioned at the beginning, if you have any notes in your reference manager attached to the documents, those will come over as document memos. I don't have any here in Maxqda because I didn't do that, but you can always add a memo yourself. So if I wanted to have a nice note memo on this journal article, I can right-click it and add a memo. And now this is the memo manager screen, so I can start writing here. And there's really no right or wrong way to use these memos, but in general, they're a really great chance to collect your thoughts on a particular topic, on the document as a whole, or any number of things. So here, if I found, for example, a big fault in the document's argument, maybe I really didn't think that it was trustworthy, I can make note of that here. Needs more, needs more data to back up their claims. That could also be a chance to use that unsubstantiated claim code that I talked about, or anything. It's totally up to you how you use that, of course. And once you're done, you just exit out and it will be right there for you to reference next to the document. You can also have memos in the text itself. So let's see if I have one here. Oh yeah. So right here, I have a little memo attached to this article. You can see it because it's this little post-it note icon here next to my coding stripes. And if I double click on it, I can not only see the segment that it's attached to, this highlighted portion, but I can also see what I wrote about it previously. So here I had just a thought about how if you take this drug with food, it can actually reduce its efficacy. And then I have a note to myself that, I think I've seen that somewhere else in the literature that it's better to take on an empty stomach. So for me personally, I just really like to work with memos as like stream of consciousness, just note to self about what I'm doing. But again, as with all of this, it's going to depend on your approach here. There's also different types of memos that you can have. So you'll notice up here, there's different symbols that you can put in them. This blank one is just a free memo. You can also have an exclamation point or a question mark. I use the question mark when there's something that I don't fully understand and I might need to do more research on. I can tag it with that little question. There's T for theory. So if you've recently read about a theory that you think would apply to this specific article, you can use that. There's L and M, which I just learned the other day, are literature and methodology memos. And then there's this RQ for research question, as well as different colors. So you can use these for whatever meaning you want. To add a memo into the text, you just highlight the segment that you want to add the memo to, right-click and insert memo for selection here. You'll be able to write your memo and save it to that selection. Okay, the other thing too, especially if you want to take Christina Silver's suggestion with the critical appraisal and to use those 5 questions, you can put these 5 questions into a memo attached to the code for easy copying and pasting. So you'll see here I have that little memo attached to the code. And you already saw me do this, but you can copy it from here. And then for every article that you do this for, you can just come in, go to the edit mode, and paste it in. You don't have to always write it out each time. So memos can also be a great place to just hold information, hold questions that you're asking yourself. You can, safeguard your research question or your methodology as a whole. Totally up to you. Next, I'm going to just cover this quickly because there's actually an entire webinar that you can that you can attend on this topic, but I really like working with paraphrases as well for literature reviews. So it's exactly what it sounds like. In Maxqda, you can paraphrase your texts. So instead of reading through very dense articles or long articles, you can succinctly paraphrase it and then work with those paraphrases to do your coding or to do your analysis. So paraphrases are under the analysis tab here, and then it's this little orange icon, paraphrase. You have to be on the actual literature here in the document browser. So this is just the reference data. It won't really work very well. Let's open up a journal article here. Which one did I do it on? I think I did this one. Maybe not. But so once you have your journal open, you can hit paraphrase. And paraphrase document will open up paraphrasing mode. So now what I can do is as I read through this article, I can highlight each section and then paraphrase it in my own words. I believe the word limit here is like 200, so you can't be too wordy. You really have to be brief. So, I don't know, thromboembolic disease is associated with mortality and morbidity, and so on. Then once you're done, you just hit OK. You can see that it appears over here on the right-hand side, and you can continue on. So now I can go and paraphrase my next paragraph. Current options to prevent VTE. It's a lot of science stuff I don't quite understand. And so on. You kind of get the point here. And you can work through your documents like that. So once you paraphrase, you can do an overview of your paraphrases and then assign codes to the document through that. So here in the Paraphrases tool, again, you can come to Categorize Paraphrases. And this gives you this table with, in this first column here, you have the document that it's in, and then the paraphrases. Lastly, you have the codes here, if there are any, and you can apply codes from it. So now I can see, I've added my paraphrases to this article here, and I can work through. So let's see. This one is saying that there was a clinical trial where the safety and efficacy of the drug was similar to that of conventional therapy. So if I have, for example, a code on safety, I can apply that here. So I'll make the new code. Make it yellow, hit OK. And I can just drag, maybe not, drag my quote onto the code. And you can see here now this paraphrase is attached to this safety code. And if I return to this paraphrase in the document itself, the code safety will be on that whole paragraph that was associated with the paraphrase. So let's see if we can go find that. It's in Abdul Sattar. Oops, I'm freezing up a little bit. Okay, there we go. Yeah, so we can see it right here actually in this document. We have the safety code here that I just added. And if I click on it, I can see that it's attached to this paragraph, which has this paraphrase attached to it, talking about the result of the clinical trial. So this can be a great way of working very quickly with your literature. Again, the Paraphrases tool has its whole own webinar taught by Michael Gizzi, who's a professor at Illinois State. So if you're interested in learning more about the Paraphrases, I highly recommend taking his webinar. It's free like this one. I just wanted to show the Paraphrases tool quickly, just to give you an idea of like what you can do with it and how it relates to doing the literature. So in the next like 10 or so minutes that I have left to give my spiel, what can you do after you've coded? There's a couple things. The first is just to work with that retrieved segments window that I've shown already a couple times. So again, just to reiterate, if you've worked through your data with codes like I have here, whether they're thematic codes like these ones where I'm looking at the drug symptoms and categorizing them, or whether you've worked with more of like a critical appraisal approach where you're questioning the literature and evaluating its claims, you can work with it in the retrieved segments. I already showed that, so I'm not going to talk about that again. I'm just going to go ahead and move on. The other tools that I really like are both visual tools, and that's here up at the top. And the first is the Code Matrix browser. So what this does is it's kind of like a Crosstabs, but it will show you visually the distribution of codes across documents. So that might not be super helpful if you're using some of these critical appraisal codes, but if you're using more descriptive or more thematic codes like I have here, this will be very interesting for you. So this again works with that concept of activation where you have to tell it which codes and which documents you're looking at. I'm going to go ahead and activate all of my codes that are related to my drug here. And I'm going to also activate all of my references. Oops. And pull this up. Okay. So in this here, what we have are our codes listed here on the side. And then our columns, let me make it smaller maybe. Yeah. Each column here is a different article or a different document. So let me find the stuff here. Okay. So each little node here is showing me that there are codes in that document. So I can see that the Xarelto FAQ, the drugs FAQ page, is talking quite a lot about the side effects, right? Because it has that large dot there. Conversely, I can see that, you know, this page here, the Wikipedia page, it has less mentions of the side effects versus this journal article. Actually, that's another web page. Let's find a journal. Versus this here is only talking about the side effects a little bit, right? Because maybe this article doesn't really focus on the side effects at all. It's more talking about like the prevention of something. So this is just a nice way to see which pieces of literature are talking about which themes. So, if you're looking more at like theory or different concepts, you can clearly see that reflected in this tool here. And again, the size of the node is showing the frequency, and it has to do with how often you've coded. So if you haven't coded your literature, this unfortunately won't show anything for you. But because I've took the time to go through my literature and apply these codes and categorize things like, the dosing regimen and challenges and prescribing it and so on, I can see that here. The next thing that's quite similar is the code relations browser, and that's right next to your matrix browser up here. And this will show the co-occurrence of codes that you've applied to your literature. So I actually don't know what this is going to look like for this particular set of data. Okay. So now we have again on the side here our codes listed in the rows, but our columns are also codes. And this is showing where the coded segments overlap, or rather if they overlap. So I can see here that the dosing regimen has a little square with contradictions. So this tells me that I've coded a segment of text with both of those codes, and then that tells me that there might be perhaps a relationship between those two things, right? In this particular example, I think it's probably if you have like pre-existing conditions or like qualities, you might have to adjust your dosage of the drug, and so on. And again, the size of the square here is showing you the number of times it's overlapped. So here we have food and drug interactions and side effects with a medium-sized square, and if I mouse over it, it says 3. So I can see that food and drug interactions can cause side effects. So there's that relationship there. This can be a great way of just seeing, how the themes in your project are overlapping. Okay. Lastly, when you do your import of the bibliographic data, it takes some of that bibliographic data and turns it into document variables. So you can do certain mixed methods tools with your literature. Just to show you what that looks like quickly, is here in variables, you have your list of document variables. And this will tell you all the variables that are currently in your project. And as you can see here at the bottom, we have several reference data points listed. So we have the type as a variable. So that's, is it a book? Is it a journal? Is it a web page? You have the author, you have the title, the reference ID. I think that's unique to the program, maybe. And then the year of publication. So you can work with these and do things such as a crosstabs, for example. Your crosstabs will be under your mixed methods category up here. And it's this icon. And here, let me just delete this. So here you have your list of variables, and again, you have that bibliographic data here, and then you have to tell it what columns you're looking at, of course. So if you wanted to compare your literature over time, for example, like you wanted to compare articles that were written from 2015 to today to articles that were written 2015 or before 2015 rather, you could do that here. So you'll drag over your year variable twice, and you'll see that it's empty. And you just want to assign it a value down here, and using these mathematical bracket guys. So let's do larger than or equal to 2015 for our first one. And then this one will be smaller or equal to 2014 here. And now if we hit OK, we have a nice crosstabs of the codes split up by those variables that we saw. So I imagine that this would work a little bit better if you're not looking at something as like scientific as like drug effects just drug effects that probably like won't change too much. I would think maybe, but I can see here like, you know, the literature from before 2014 talked more about contradictions than the newer literature. And same thing here with the side effects. We had 4 mentions of side effects before 2014 and only 2 after 2015, and so on. Lastly, the other mixed methods tool that I really like for literature reviews and also just in general is this interactive quote matrix. And this is taking the idea of a crosstabs, but giving you a more qualitative result. So again, this works the same exact way where you take your variables based on the reference data, you pull it into the columns here, you define it. I have comparing 2020 to articles from before or during 2019. And if we look at this, we can now go through and for any of the codes that we have in our project, we can look at those coded segments. So we'll look at like food and drug interactions, I guess, or side effects. Okay, so now we can see in 2020, this is what the literature had to say about side effects of this disease, of this medication. And this is what it had to say about side effects in 2019 and before. So you can compare, you know, trends over time. You can compare how themes have appeared or disappeared over time in your literature. You can compare how the conversation around a certain topic has changed over time. You could also, instead of doing the year, you could use the authors. So you could compare how author A is speaking about a specific theory to how author B is speaking about it, or so on. Like there's really no limit to what you can look at with these tools. All right. Well, I will leave you with this quote from Maxqda that I really like, and that is that research is a journey, travel it well. Thank you.